business case, those of us in sort of the sustainable investing field, and that's why we wrote our white paper 18 months ago to more effectively make the business case. Then we also identified sort of 5 actions that we thought the capital markets really needed to address, of which stranded assets happens to be one of the 5 actions. And we're embarking on seeing a lot of these initiatives come to fruition, and we feel pretty good about that. But we're also concerned about sort of where we are at this juncture, and the whole conversation around whether it's a carbon bubble or the whole question about whether these reserves can be burned or not is becoming a very topical subject in capital markets. And what disturbs us about it, actually, is what the market is saying is that we don't think that there will be a price on carbon anytime soon. We don't think that we will have regulatory change globally or even in specific countries fast enough to make a difference. And that's, and on the one hand, that's really bad news and sad news, but it's also more or less misguided. And it's misguided because of the $40 or $50 trillion worth of long-term asset owners that I referred to a minute ago, to more or less say, well, wait a minute, it looks like the market isn't going to put a price on carbon, or the government isn't going to put a price on carbon, therefore we as investors should just not worry about it, because in the short term, if we underweight or divest of Exxon, it's possible that we'll underperform in our portfolios. And that probably will be true in a short-term period because of the weight of these sectors potentially. On the other hand, to assume that there will be no impact on your portfolio over the course of the next 10 or 15 or 20 years is a mistake, is a fundamental mistake. And those who have long-term fiduciary duty, intergenerational fiduciary duty, need to consider this risk. So ultimately, I think the question around how do we address it is, well, who do we want at the table? As Bill has said, it's clear that the carbon emitters are not going to welcome this conversation. It will destroy their business model, and they've been at it for 100 and 150 years, and they're not going to go down easily. So the question, therefore, is who can you bring to the table, who wants to see this transition, and who will help mobilize the conversation. And I do think it's a number of businesses, because don't forget, the transition to low-carbon economy will be the biggest transition in economic history. Everything you did today will have to change. That's not just energy, that's what you eat, that's what you wear, that's how you get here, et cetera, which is why the whole question around sustainability is a bigger deal. So it's those businesses, those organizations that get that are part of that solution, plus those who are sort of categorically aligned about multiple generations, ought to be at the table with government, with civil society, to help bring this debate forward. And we really, I used to say 10 years ago, I thought that we could, through business and capital markets, make the change. The reason why we founded Generation, in addition from an investment perspective, was an advocacy role. We truly wanted to make a difference, and we thought that capital markets would be that source of change. We still believe capital markets and business will be the driver of change. They will mobilize the capital, but we must engage government and we must engage civil society to do it, and we have to figure out who needs to be at this table as quickly as possible.
Super. Let me do I want to dig down into this harder discussion specifically around what to do with fossil fuel companies. So we'll take a round around that, and then we'll look to you for some questions. Is that okay? So the International Energy Agency estimates that 2/3 of the fossil fuel product, the world's proven reserves, cannot be consumed if we are to avoid the worst effects, as you started this conversation. Under this scenario, HSBC recently concluded that oil and gas companies could lose 40 to 60% of their value. On the other hand, if fossil fuel companies continue with business as usual, the resulting greenhouse gas emissions will drive increasingly extreme weather, putting the industry's infrastructure and its customers at risk. So obviously, it's not just a huge warning message for the planet, but for investors who hold these assets, we have to think what to do there. Now, I'll start out just by talking just a minute about us. So we have a $160 billion portfolio, globally invested. We own the market. That's the plan. Much of that portfolio is passively invested. So we are not actively, obviously, trading stocks every day on the majority of the stock. These are long-term holdings. So the philosophy has always been, when we see things going astray or need course correction, is to first engage those companies. And relative to the energy field, we've had some success, not nearly as dramatic as the issues you put on the table, but rather around the flaring issue in North Dakota that some of our colleagues did with significant effect, we thought, on curtailing that. We've done engagements around hydraulic fracking, energy efficiency. There's absolutely ways of moving some of those changes forward. I will tell you, because we've had divestment discussions on other topics. In California, we've had two pieces of legislation, one on Sudan and one on Iran. They're required divestment, potentially, after engagement. And sometimes the results are not what you would expect. You approach a company, say ourselves, and we start that engagement. They would like nothing better than us to divest. So it's not a pain point for them. They would love for us to get away. Don't bother with them. Don't talk about it. And what would happen if we did? Obviously, capital would fall into place. The other economic piece of this is that we have to remember, we haven't talked about, there is a lot of capital out there. A lot of capital. We're not in we've got a scarcity of a lot of resources here, but capital is not one of them. So capital from sovereign wealth funds, capital from other entities is waiting in the queue, whether it be for private equity or others. So let's start. So before we go there, just that's somewhat the complexity of dealing with the portfolio. So rarely would we move to divestment, and sometimes it's hard to predict what the outcome of that is. So let's kind of talk through that a little bit. Do you want to start?
Sure. It's just the right question. I mean, the first thing to say is we're under no illusions that we're going to bankrupt Exxon by doing this. Although over time, as we raise these questions about whether they can or should access those reserves and things, it gets more difficult for them. But the real point in this case of divestment, and in many cases, in the few cases where it really ever comes up, is that what you're trying to do is withdraw a kind of social license from these players. So the one great example of this in recent American history was South Africa and apartheid. All right. And there was just the same argument that people thought, oh, well, we want to keep these companies in here and engage with, and it was sort of a self-serving argument, but you could kind of make it up until the point, really, when Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu said, no, stop doing that. And when Nelson Mandela got out of prison, the first place he came almost was the U.S., and he didn't go first to the White House. He went to the Bay Area in California. He went to the University of California, and he said, your students who forced and the people who helped you, who got $3 billion in apartheid-tainted stock, sold, you and the other 155 colleges and universities around the country and 100 civic jurisdictions and things that did this work are great allies. We fought for our own liberation, but in a globally linked world, we require your help. And that's why. When we were doing this big nationwide tour, this sort of 25 cities of sort of sold out concert halls night after night in November to kind of launch a lot of this stuff.
But you had Justin Bieber with you.
Right. So one of the things we showed, really the rock star we had with us was on video, and it was Desmond Tutu. And he said, if you could see what's happening in Africa right now with famine and drought and things, you would understand why I'm asking you to take up that same tool that you took up 25 years ago and not apply it to, it's not, this is a limited set of the universe, the fossil fuel companies who have these big carbon reserves. We're not, the students now have engaged in, I mean, it's been what some magazine called the fastest growing student movement in decades in this country. Now on 340 college campuses, this fight is underway, and it's spread very quickly off of it. Last week, 11 city governments announced that they were planning to divest. And the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco voted to ask their pension fund to figure out how to do this. The city of Seattle was the first to divest. It's happening very quickly because so many of these players have, I mean, in Seattle, the mayor said, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars building seawalls. Now, why would we invest in the companies making it necessary? On college campuses, what increasingly professors and some administrators are saying is, we've spent the last 10 years boasting about how we're greening our campus. If it's important for us to make the dining hall green, why is it okay not to do that with our portfolio? I mean, these are the places where we found out about climate change, is in the research labs of these institutions. If we're not prepared to take, it's not that it's an easy step. Yeah, I mean, your funds are commingled with this and that, and it'll take some work to get them out. And that's why students everywhere have said, take 5 years to do it. You know, that's fine. We don't want you to have a fire sale and, you know, whatever. But if we can't do even those relatively easy things, then it's hard to imagine how we're going to do, as both of you have pointed out, the really hard society-wide tasks of moving into this new world. This is a relatively easy task. By itself, it does not stop climate change, halt the power of the fossil fuel industry. But it's one front of many that people are opening up. And just, I think, one thing to just take away is that this finally, in the last few years, there really is an environmental movement. There's not just a group of environmental organizations, wonderful as they are, but there's increasingly a large number of people willing to really put it on the line for this. Because if you're 20 right now, sitting in your college, I mean, you've got 70 years ahead of you watching those rising lines of temperature and sea level. They're just going to run right over your life. That's
it's worthy of another hour. It's a very issue, and I think from the institutional investor community, I wouldn't agree that it's simple by any stretch. The implications are very complicated for a portfolio of ours. Where I would give respect and credibility to it does sharpen the debate, and I recognize that as value. I wouldn't agree that divestiture is a likely outcome here, or that would have the expected effect given the nature of this industry. But David, if you want to comment on that, I want to turn to the audience right away. If there's any,
I would just add, I think the conversation around divestment is a great one, actually. I think it is sharpening the conversation, and as I said, I think the $40 to $50 trillion of long-term assets is critical that we engage in that conversation. And there are intermediate steps that one can take for sure. And whether we like it or not, we're going to have stranded assets, and that's the point I want to make. Is okay, you don't want to strand your carbon assets, then you're going to have stranded cities, stranded countries, stranded agricultural land. So we're going to have it is an investment question. It is an investment risk that we need to think about. And you can run a $15 or $20 billion portfolio without it.
all right, questions, comments? I have to look out kind of early. We've got a bunch of, it's hard to see you too. I'll start right here with you, and then I'll kind of work around. Did you raise your hand? Okay.
First, I wanted to just thank you, Bill, for reminding us of the urgency of this discussion, and as well, David. I actually wanted to ask, David, a personal question. I'm really curious as to how, what was the shift or what was that tipping point from your 18 years at Goldman Sachs in a very traditional financial environment and institution to bring you into this thinking in which you so clearly articulated the business case for sustainability? What happened to you? What was the tipping point that made you change so that I can tell my husband at home?
Wow, that is personal. Okay, marriage on the line, David.
Yes.
What's the deal?
Well, the truth is, I actually wanted to be a teacher when I was growing up, and my college actually disbanded the education department and forced me into finance. and further truth is, I actually volunteered for the Peace Corps and was rejected, which is hard to do as a side. And I then applied to get my doctorate in psychology, was rejected there too. So I found my way in finance. But my interest...
You're really letting go now.
Yeah. It's a sad story. But the honest answer to your question is that I grew up in South America when I was young, and I saw poverty in ways that were shocking. And since I've been sort of 11 or 12 years old, my interest has actually been in poverty. And when I met Al for the first time, and we were developing generation, of course his interest was in climate change, my interest was in poverty. And we realized, and this is what Desmond Tutu said, it's the same issue. They're interlinked, and you can't be focused on one without focus on the other, and that has carried forward into how we thought about generation.
I'm just right in front of me here, yes? Go ahead.
Yell it out.
I'll yell it out.
Okay.
An ally, the International Energy Agency, which you mentioned, basically says that we have until 2017, till sort of the window of opportunity closes for that 2 centigrade change. And they are so frustrated that they're coming out, the International Energy Agency, is there oil and gas, but this is not UNEP. They're coming out with a report June 10th on climate change. And I hope that all of you, pick it up. And I think this will be an extremely important tool for all of you to sort of move together with what is an association that was based on finding out and having energy security and oil and gas reserves. So I ask you all to please make sure that you get that report, because it talks about the carbon bubble, the stranded assets, and is a plea from them, because they're so frustrated with their own industry, clients, and governments to make the change before we're really doomed. We're cooked. Okay?
And
Because we
one
are
of the
cooked.
things that the IEA has done a very good job, and its director is very, very smart man. One of the things they've done a good job with is pointing out, and I think that's where that 2017 number starts to come from, that the thing we most need not to do at the moment is build new stuff that locks us into, and that's why the Keystone thing is such a good example. In fact, a fellow up in Seattle, Casey Golden at Climate Solutions, and then wrote an essay about what they called the Keystone Principle. Like, at the very least at this point, stop building new stuff that is going to lock you into another 50 years of this.
I've got the hook. Well, one more. This gentleman here. Go ahead. That's it.
Hi, Bennett Freeman from Coward Investments.
Yep.
I really want to commend Bill McKibben's extraordinary focus on the severity of the problem and the urgency of addressing it, of solving it, and your focus on the underlying, what you call the business plan of these companies in the fossil fuels business. I think that the divestment movement gives new focus and urgency, but I do believe that there are other ways that we can help solve this problem together. I think most of the investors in the conference do own shares in some of the very companies that we're rightly criticizing here. And I do believe that there's a role for us to not only own but engage. But to engage not on the margins, but on the absolute fundamentals of the business plan. To challenge on the stranded assets. To challenge on a shift to alternative energy, to get companies to think of being in the energy, not the oil business. and to make a difference in some of the non-environmental issues as we have, for example, extractive revenue transparency, where our voice has been very persuasive. So I don't think that this is a choice between divestment or ownership and engagement. I think that we're in this fight, this struggle together, and that there are ways that we can work together in pursuit of the common goal here. And over time, we're going to make a difference. We already are.
I would just say, I take the point, but I want to go back to something I said before. Two things that both go directly in. One is, okay, I mean, engage and fight hard and stuff, but I think probably with most of the big fossil fuel companies, you're kidding yourself if you think that what you'll be able to accomplish with them is getting them out of the hydrocarbon business. In fact, this is, you know, the amount that they spend each year to find new hydrocarbons keeps going up. The second thing is, and this goes right back to where we began this discussion, bear in mind that phrase, over time, okay? One of the things that I have to stop myself from doing occasionally, since I wrote the first book about all this 25 years ago, occasionally I have to stop myself from saying, if only you'd listen to me, man, you know, because actually 25 years ago, there were a lot of things we could have done that were relatively easy and would have put us in a new trajectory, and we didn't do them. And if we had, you know, we wouldn't have solved this problem yet, but we'd be a long way towards solving it. We no longer have the luxury of time. Once the Arctic's melted, that's a clue, okay? And our job is to take now those clues, because we're no longer, the stakes in this particular thing have gotten ungodly high. Dr. King, when he would talk about civil rights, would always say in the end, he would quote, I think from Theodore Parker, he would say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This may take a while, but we're going to win. He was right. The arc of the physical universe is short, and it is bending toward heat. And if we do not get this done very fast, then we're not going to get it done. So over time may not be one of the solutions we've really got. That's why there's a lot of impatient people who are starting to end up occupying presidents' offices and whatever else.
Thanks.